Hey everyone, please close your eyes and imagine a windy afternoon in New York Bay. Standing prominently against the sky is a giant, weighing 225 tons, standing tall and majestic, the Statue of Liberty. For most of us, it is the grand symbol of eternity, a proud metal fortress defying sun and rain. But do you know, the truth behind that emerald green cloak is terrifyingly fragile. It is not at all a solid, sturdy cast block as we have always thought. In fact, it is like a completely hollow balloon, supported by an iron skeleton and wrapped on the outside with an extremely thin layer of pure copper skin. How thin? If you stack two coins on top of each other, that is exactly the thickness of the entire shell protecting America's symbol. It has stood firm for hundreds of years, not because it has any supernatural power, but thanks to human hands that carefully maintain it at the cost of millions of dollars each year. We, with our machinery and technology, are the only barrier preventing the brutal forces of nature from devouring this metal mass. So, a chilling question arises. What would happen if one day all humanity suddenly disappeared from the Earth? Right in the first year without human presence, a desolate silence envelops the island. The power grid collapses, and the water pumps at the base of the pedestal stop working forever. Without a heating system or lightning protection, the statue now stands completely exposed amid the raging storms and tempests of the Atlantic Ocean. And then, as 50 years quietly pass by, although from afar its majestic appearance seems unchanged, a death sentence has already been silently pronounced inside that dark shell. Please imagine this. Between the outer copper skin and the inner iron skeleton of the statue, there was originally a special insulating layer so that they would never touch each other directly. But after half a century of neglect, trapped moisture and constant expansion and contraction due to temperature changes have completely rotted this thin, protective layer. When the two layers of metal, copper and iron, begin to rub against each other in the salty air of seawater that has seeped in, they unintentionally trigger a highly destructive chemical reaction. This massive architectural structure is no longer a work of art. It has turned itself into a giant battery submerged in salt water. And just like a leaking, short-circuited battery, it begins the process of self-corrosion, slowly draining and devouring itself from the deepest inside, preparing for an irreversible collapse. Hey everyone, as 200 cold years sweep over the desolate city, one of the most horrifying changes begins to take shape right on the surface of the Statue of Liberty. Do you still remember the beautiful emerald green color of the statue? It was once the perfect, natural, protective shield that chemistry gave to the copper surface. But although humans have disappeared, the ghost of our industrial civilization still lingers heavily in the atmosphere. The massive remnants of emissions accumulated over centuries have turned into deadly acid rains. Decade after decade, rains filled with toxic chemicals continue to pour down, unwittingly acting as an extremely powerful cleaning agent, slowly stripping away and devouring that protective cloak. The statue gradually sheds its former self, transforming from its elegant and proud green hue into a pitch-black, ulcerated, and necrotic state. Spreading holes begin to bore deep into the thin copper skin, revealing a grim and heartbreaking appearance on the face of the goddess. And then, in the blink of an eye, 500 years have passed, and the deathly silence of the island now gives way to a silent but brutal uprising of nature. The holes carved by acid rain have become wide-open gateways, inviting wildlife to invade. Flocks of seabirds come to perch and nest right inside the crown and the torch. They deposit layers of droppings with highly concentrated acid, continuing to ruthlessly erode the metal from the outside. At the same time, ocean winds carry dust and seeds, sowing them deep into the ever-widening cracks. You should absolutely not underestimate those tiny seedlings. When they sprout, the tangled tree roots, seemingly soft and weak, yet possessing the invisible splitting power of nature, patiently creep in and tear apart every metal joint. An entire wild ecosystem is now feeding on and growing over this giant mechanical corpse. Deep inside that corpse, the deadly saltwater battery we mentioned earlier is still tirelessly at work, relentlessly draining and grinding away at the iron backbone. You see, there is no need for bombs or earth-shattering explosions. The most thorough destruction comes from the smallest and most harmless things. A drop of salty dew, a young sprout, or a moist gust of wind. The great symbol of humanity is being dismantled, piece by Mother Nature, in a breathtakingly desolate beauty, only to be quietly pushed to the brink of a terrifying point of no return. Hey everyone, as we reach the milestone of 1,000 years without human presence, the great time bomb hidden inside the statue finally reaches its moment of detonation. You have probably seen a glass water bottle shatter after being accidentally left in the freezer. The reason is that water expands when it freezes, creating enormous pressure that bursts the outer shell. Something similar, but a million times more devastating, is happening to the iron skeleton of the Statue of Liberty. After centuries of being gnawed away by seawater and oxygen, the inner iron core has completely rusted. Cruelly, when iron turns into rust, its volume swells up to 7 times its original size. This brutal expansion creates unimaginable pressure from the deepest core, like a monster stretching its shoulders and struggling to tear open its tight cocoon. The enormous rivets that had held the copper skin tightly for centuries are now subjected to compressive forces beyond their endurance limit. They begin to snap and explode, shooting out in all directions like cannonballs. The outer copper shell, already pitch black and ulcerated, is torn apart into massive pieces, fully exposing the rotten and decayed skeleton inside to the open sky. And then, as 2,000 long years pass by, the final moment of judgment finally descends upon the east coast of America. The most critical weak point of the entire structure, the place that will deliver the fatal blow, is none other than the right arm holding the torch high. From the moment it was first built, that outstretched arm had always borne an enormous torsional stress. Now, after thousands of years of heroically straining against the pressure of gravity and the constant twisting in fierce storms, the metal has reached exhaustion. This phenomenon is exactly like taking a metal paperclip and bending it back and forth repeatedly. Eventually, it becomes brittle and snaps. Amid a ferocious, super-tropical storm carrying destructive winds, the dilapidated frame has no remaining elasticity to resist. A shattering crack tears through the gloomy sky as the giant arm holding the torch breaks off, dragging with it the collapse and loss of balance of the entire head and upper body. In an instant, most of what was once humanity's proudest symbol collapses heavily into the shallow waters of New York Bay. The water splashes violently, swallowing the final remnants. At that moment, our greatest pride has officially fallen under the merciless pressure of the laws of physics, lying silently beneath the cold waves and preparing for an even more complete erasure by time. As the chariot of time inadvertently rolls past the 5,000-year milestone, the collapsed ruins of the Statue of Liberty must confront a force even more primal and majestic than any superstorm: the complete blood transfusion of the entire ocean system. You and our friends surely remember the global warming we once struggled so hard to combat. But now in this distant future, all the ice at both poles has completely melted. That enormous volume of water pours into the oceans, raising global sea levels and unwittingly swallowing every coastal remnant. Liberty Island, once proudly welcoming millions of tourists each year, is now completely submerged, buried under layers of cold silt and sediment from the Hudson River, half covered at the bottom of the shallow sea. But the darkness at the bottom of the sea is not the end. It is the beginning of a most extraordinary biological miracle. Please, hey everyone, temporarily forget the world of plants that need sunlight for photosynthesis. At this depth, the pitch-black ruins of the statue suddenly become a perfect artificial coral reef, a lavish feast beckoning the strangest inhabitants of the ocean. Trillions upon trillions of chemosynthetic bacteria, those tiny microscopic miners living in total darkness, begin to densely coat the metal surface. Instead of needing light, they possess a special digestive system capable of secreting miraculous enzymes to break chemical bonds. They start gnawing, breaking down atomic structures, and eating the entire massive quantity of rusted copper and iron to generate survival energy. And then, as 10,000 long years slowly draw to a close, nature's absolute erasure is finally complete. Under the relentless tearing of bacteria and the erosive force of the near-bottom currents, hundreds of tons of pure copper gradually dissolve completely. They transform into countless charged ions, dissolving into the salty water and forming hazy blue chemical clouds that drift vaguely out toward the distant sea. The metal mass that once took the proud form of a woman raising a torch high has now vanished completely, leaving not a single trace. In its place remains only a silent, undulating mound of biological sediment. Standing before the overwhelming silence of the deep sea, we suddenly realize a cold yet brilliant truth. Mother Nature has never hated or deliberately destroyed the great symbols of human civilization. Nature is simply activating a colossal recycling chain, indifferent and patient, reclaiming every single atom of the minerals that we once proudly borrowed temporarily from the Earth's crust. And then, as hundreds of thousands of years, then millions of years continue to drift by like invisible grains of sand slipping unnoticed into the desert of time, the fate of the statue enters a grand and distant era, so far-reaching that it lies beyond the power of the human mind to imagine. Hey everyone, imagine the system of ocean currents on Earth as a gigantic conveyor belt that ceaselessly circulates water to every nook and cranny across the globe. That majestic conveyor belt has slowly swept away the blue chemical haze, carrying the final tiny copper ion particles that were once the skin and flesh of the goddess, dissolving and scattering them into trillions upon trillions of water masses. It is quite possible that a few atoms that once formed the proud eyes of the statue are now drifting silently in the freezing waters of the Antarctic, while other atoms from the torch are swimming in the bloodstream of some planktonic creature in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. The form of this man-made masterpiece has been diluted to absolute nothingness, becoming microscopic specks of dust within the biosphere. But even that extreme dilution is not the final full stop in the metal's journey. You know, our Earth is actually a living entity, and the solid crust of rock upon which we once built countless civilizations is like enormous tectonic plates that never stop sliding. The sediment mound lying at the bottom of the ancient New York Bay, still carrying the final chemical traces of the statue, begins to be slowly folded by the North American tectonic plate. Slowly but irresistibly, that plate is dragged downward, plunging straight into the molten mantle deep beneath the Earth's crust. Like a primordial furnace of the planet, the temperatures reaching thousands of degrees Celsius there have devoured and completely melted the final material remnants, stripping away every trace of the past and returning that metal mass to its most primitive state, glowing magma. Standing before the eternal silence of the universe, we suddenly feel an incredibly beautiful and liberating sense of release. The shape of freedom, as defined by the human mind, turns out to exist for only the briefest blink of an eye in geological history. Yet at the atomic level, nothing in this world truly vanishes into meaninglessness. The Statue of Liberty has never truly died. It has simply dissolved, drifting with the salty winds, melting into the pulse of the vast ocean, and obediently sinking deep into the fiery heart of the Earth, resting quietly for a moment, waiting for a new grand cycle of cosmic remolding in the endless universe.